Yeah. Hair flip, yeah, I'm a badass bitch. I don't like it. Hair flip, yeah. Oh my god. So you guys should be happy. Oh my goodness. Hair flip. But anyways, hair flip. Hair flipping on these toes. Hi.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to your boy Sean Davey Way Show. Make sure you tap that like and subscribe. Hit that bell if you would like to be notified of all of our future content. Today's video, Today's Surviving, is on Netflix, the one and only. Netflix recently just came out with Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, starring Evan Peters as the lead. And I must say, there's a lot of good things about it, and there's a lot of bad things about it. But Netflix should be being survived because they have done this before with other stories and with creators that come to them with ideas. So I feel that they need to be survived. It's a topic that I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to Netflix and how they push their stories due to how much they're, cramming the stories and movies and miniseries and series out. It doesn't seem as if they're taking their time or taking enough time to make sure these things are done properly. It's just, we have a popular topic, let's slap a name on top of it and throw a product out there instead of really doing our research and making sure all parties are being considered and that this is okay with all parties. Now, you may not know what I mean, but just sit back and relax. We'll get right into surviving Netflix Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. I won't be doing a full breakdown of Jeffrey Dahmer and his past. If you would like that, just let me know and I can put a video together about what I think went on with Jeffrey Dahmer. But we will give the audience that don't know a lot about the Jeffrey Dahmer situation a little bit of backstory so that the Netflix series makes a little bit more sense as we go forward. So let's jump right into it. Netflix just dropped a brand new true crime show, Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, starring Evan Peters as the notorious serial Killer. While the series is a fictional account of true events that went under the radar for over a decade, the gruesome murders of Dahmer's victims are very real. Between 1972 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer, Killed and dismembered 17 innocent victims, all of who were young boys and men. If that wasn't terrifying enough, Dahmer was known to keep souvenirs of each victim after murdering them. Dahmer's merciless murders are still sparking conversations after nearly 30 years thanks to the new Netflix series. Ahead, find everything we need to know about the real Dahmer and his victim over the years. How did Dahmer kill his victims? Most of Dahmer's victims were calculated. He would prey on his victims in public spaces like shopping malls, gay bars, and bus stops. According to a report from Biography, he lured them back to his apartment and gave them drinks he laced with other things. Once they passed away, he would have sex with them and dismember their bodies, and keep souvenirs like body parts, skulls, and genitals. The R word, dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism were all of Jeffrey's plans. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences because he unalived 17 men, including the following. On June 18, 1978, Stephen Hicks, whom was 18 years old. Side note, Stephen Hicks has been labeled as a 19-year-old with news reports, a 16-year-old with news reports, and 18. So the main number that they go with Stephen Hicks's age is 18, but I truly believe that he was 16 years old. Here's a short clip of a news reporter stating that Stephen Hicks was only 16 years old.
The subject of Dahmer's fantasy was 16-year-old Stephen Hicks.
Around that time, this was the late 70s, early 80s, they didn't have a lot of information on Stephen Hicks. They didn't even know he was missing until Jeffrey Dahmer told the truth in 91, 92 when he did his confession. So they knew nothing about Stephen, about his body, him passing away, him missing, nothing. They knew nothing about this young man, Stephen, although he was buried in Ohio. So I do believe that Stephen may have been from there, and the little family that he did had, I believe that they were from there. But again, there was a lot of misreporting going on. I believe Stephen Hicks was 16 years old. November 20th, 1987, Stephen Toomey was 24 years old. January 16th, 1987, Jamie Doxtator, 14 years old. March 24th, 1988, Richard Guerrero, 25 years old. March 25th, 1989, Anthony Sears was 26 years old. May 20th, 1990, Raymond Smith also went by Ricky Beeks, age 33. June 1990, Edward W. Smith was 28. September 1990, Ernest Miller, he was 22. September 24th, 1990, David C. Thomas was 23 years old. February 18th, 1991, Curtis Strachter, 18 years old. April 7th, 1991, Errol Lindsay, 19 years old. May 24th, 1991, Anthony Tony Hughes, 31 years old. May 27th, 1991, Conorak, age 14. June 30th, 1991, Matt Turner, age 20. July 5th, 1991, Jeremiah Wingberger, age 23. July 15th, 1991, Oliver Lacey, 23 years old. And finally, July 19th, 1991, Joseph Bradoff, he was 25. On July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer's last victim, Tracy Edwards actually made it out of his apartment alive and led Milwaukee police to discover the other people who were unalive. And that's how Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, starts out. So spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, we're definitely going to spoil it and ruin it for you. So this may be the time for you to exit if you want to watch this series and haven't watched it yet, because I'm about to spoil it to pieces. It's important to remember, while a non-fictional story, this is a fictional story of how a non-fictional story happened. So let's start off with episode 1. In episode 1, it's more so of Jeffrey Dahmer in his later years, right around the time he got caught because he was with the victim Tracy Edwards, which is the victim that got away and led the police to Jeffrey Dahmer and everything that he had been doing. Quick side note before we get into the scene, I would like to applaud Evan Peters for doing a phenomenal job as playing Jeffrey Dahmer. There are behind the scenes interviews that Evan Peters did with Netflix, and I appreciate the fact that he noticed that there was a lot of racism and homophobia that was going on back in this time too. A main reason of why Jeffrey got away with the crimes that he did. So I really appreciated Evan Peters noticing what was actually going on in that day and age. And I appreciated that. Again, I can't say that enough. He is an actor and he did a job. He understood the assignment and came through as Jeffrey Dahmer. There's been many of movies that have been made about Jeffrey Dahmer, and I feel that Evan Peters has executed it phenomenally. I think he did a very good job. It's a very hard role to play. It's not easy to enter a mind of a psychopath, and Evan did just that. So shout out to Evan Peters. Again, he's just an actor. It's not like he wrote it or, anything like that. It has everything to do with Ryan Murphy and others of writing the script and directing the docuseries or miniseries, whatever you want to call it. But again, Evan Peters, standout actor. I believe that he definitely deserves awards for his performance. It was amazing. At this time with the episodes, which we're going to get into episode 1 right now, we're going to do fact or fiction. And with fact or fiction, there's a lot of things in Jeffrey Dahmer's real story, which is non-fictional, that on the show, this docuseries that they did, Dahmer, that are fictional, that actually didn't happen. So let's talk about a few of those things, and then we will continue with the commentary. In episode 1, Tracy Edwards, who was Dahmer's last victim in 91, was very sexual with Jeffrey in the scene. There was a part to where Jeffrey's fingers were put into Tracy's mouth and he was sucking on Jeffrey's fingers. He undressed. He did a sexual dance tease for Jeffrey and whatnot in a way of trying to escape. So with this escape antic, with the being sexual with Jeffrey, do you think that this is fact or fiction? In the original story of Jeffrey Dahmer, did Tracy Edwards try and sleep with Jeffrey as a way of exiting the apartment? If you answered fiction, you are absolutely correct. In the original story, Tracy Edwards did not try to do anything sexual besides remove his shirt just to make Jeffrey more comfortable. In the docuseries, he tries to get Jeffrey to go back inside of the living room, and when he does a striptease for Jeffrey. That didn't happen. What actually happened is that Tracy Edwards requested to use the restroom. And Jeffrey did let him use the restroom. But remember, Tracy had on one cuff. He didn't have both cuffs on. He only had on one. And Jeffrey held the other cuff and walked him to the bathroom. He used the restroom, and then after, Jeffrey walked him back into the room. After those things happen, you see in the scene that Jeffrey puts his head onto Tracy's chest and states that it's going to come to a point to where I'm going to eat your heart. That did happen. But when the scene goes to Tracy telling Jeffrey that he wanted to show him something, that he basically wanted to do something to him type of situation with the nude photos and going back into the living room, that didn't happen either. What actually happened is that Tracy asked again if he could go to the restroom. He requested to go to the restroom every time Jeffrey requested that Tracy lay across the bed so that he could put the other cuff on. Every time he did, he would redirect Jeffrey by stating that he had to use the restroom, trying to find a way to escape. So again, that did not happen. Another thing that didn't happen, Jeffrey did not meet Tracy at the gay bar with his friends. He actually met Tracy at a mall with 2 of his friends. Another thing that's very weird, Tracy allegedly isn't gay. Tracy stated during the trial when he was testifying against Jeffrey that he is a straight male, and that Jeffrey knew that he was a straight male because his friends that were along with him were straight males as well. And Jeffrey offered them to come back to the apartment to take pictures of them and whatnot. And the other guys wanted to bring girls along. That is allegedly why Jeffrey gave his 2 friends the wrong address, because Jeffrey wanted Tracy all to himself and he didn't want any women involved. So again, it is false, it is fiction that Jeffrey met Tracy at the gay bar at the beginning of the docuseries when Dahmer's in the bar and he goes home with Tracy. That never happened. Here is Tracy himself on stand stating that he is straight and that Jeffrey Dahmer gave his friends the wrong address.
In the late afternoon, early morning hours of July the 22nd.
Grand Avenue Mall.
And that was in Milwaukee.
Correct.
Downtown on Wisconsin Avenue.
Wisconsin, correct.
Were you with somebody or were you alone?
A couple of her friends, yeah.
Okay, so the record is absolutely clear. You are not a homosexual, are you?
No, not at all.
Okay. So you were with a couple of your buddies, were you?
That's correct.
And what pictures that you were going to be posing for if you chose to take him up on the offer?
He said nude.
Nude.
Right.
Going to go with Mr. Dahmer, or was there no agreement?
They were going to meet up with us eventually later on that evening. Yeah.
Meet up with who?
Jeffrey at his apartment, but he gave them the wrong address at that time.
Okay, so did you...
Now, I'm just as confused as some of you may be, because if you're not a gay male, why are you accepting money from a man to come take nude photos? Obviously, that has a tone behind it, so I don't know. I just feel like a heterosexual man would not necessarily say yes to a random man at a mall that's saying, come to my house, let me take pictures of you. It's more so of a thing that photographers try to do to females, and a lot of them kind of fall for the okie doke. But when it comes to men, they usually don't. They usually have no interest, especially if they aren't in some way, shape, or form gay or curious. Another thing that made me side-eye Tracy Edwards is that, again, he is a victim, so I'm not coming for him or anything like that, but it's just the sexuality part that kind of threw me off. Because allegedly when police found him, he was running down the street in just his underwear. In the docuseries, his shirt is off, but he has on his pants and shoes. In the original statements, in the original reports from the eyewitnesses and the police officers, Tracy just had on underwear. So again, what happened? In the Dahmer docuseries, as Tracy Edwards, Dahmer's last victim, escaped the apartment, he stumbled across a cop or two cops patrolling the area in a squad car. He approaches the car and states that someone was trying to kill him. The officers get out of the car and they ask him what's going on, and he states it again, that someone's trying to kill him. This is not true. According to the original police report in the non-fictional story of Jeffrey Dahmer, when Stacy approached them, he only approached the officers because he wanted the handcuff that Jeffrey had put on him, that was still on him. He wanted them to remove it. He never said anything about Jeffrey. He never said anything about running for his life or any of those things. So what you see in the docuseries, that is fiction. That did not happen. He was more concerned about getting the handcuff off, I feel, because he is a alleged straight man. So he don't want to go back home to his girlfriend or whoever he's talking to with these cuffs on him. It just looks weird. He's already missing a shirt. He's sweating. He's angry. He's sad. He's scared. There's a lot of things going on with him. So he asked the police officers to remove the cuffs. And by the grace of God, the police officers did not have the key or the type of key needed to take those cuffs off. So that made Tracy forced to tell them what happened to him so that they could take him back to where the key was. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer never had a key. And that's another thing that is fictional about this story, because in the docuseries, Dahmer tells the police officer that the top drawer, or drawer that he points at, has the key inside of it. Dahmer never had a key, like I said before. Why Dahmer didn't have a key is because he cut the wrist or the hands off of his victims, and that's how he got the cuffs off. So he never had a key to get him out of the cuffs in the first place. When the cop went into the room, the cop found the pictures. Jeffrey did not enter the room with the police officer. That is fictional as well. So when you see Jeffrey in the room with the police officer and he points, none of that happened. Jeffrey was in the living room with the other officer, and the victim was in the hallway, which was Tracy. He did not want to go back inside of the apartment. Again, no disrespect towards Tracy, but at the same time, to me, he's a hero without being a hero. Like, he's a hero, but he's no hero type of situation, because he only wanted the cuffs taken off. So again, thank God that the officers didn't have the key, because if the officers had the key and they would have took the cuff off of Tracy, he would have just went home. Nothing would have been done. Jeffrey would have kept doing what he was doing. He would have just went and found another victim. He's had victims that's gotten away before. So it's no big deal, because he, had victims that have escaped, but he still didn't get caught. So I feel like Jeffrey looked at it as that way too. That's why he didn't pursue him or anything like that, because Jeffrey felt so comfortable, with that would have been his 18th victim, to where he just felt like, I run the world. Like, I can do what I want to do. If I wanted to do this to you and I didn't get a chance to, oh well, I'll just go find another mark, and whatnot. So that's why I said Tracy is a hero, but not necessarily, because again, if the cops had the key to get him out of those cuffs, he would have never reported what happened to him. In episode 2, Jeffrey's backstory is given, basically from birth all the way up until around junior high-ish high school. And then there's a cutoff. In this cutoff, it shows Jeffrey in Florida, but it's not showing why he's in Florida, because the story jumps from here to there to here to there, but it all comes together towards the end. But in episode 2, it shows Jeffrey in Florida. Jeffrey was in Florida because he was stationed in Germany while he was in the army. He got honorably discharged, and allegedly the reason was because he was an alcoholic, although he was R-wording men inside of the army. He found out how to do a date R-word, and he started to do that. He started to put sleeping pills in certain people's drinks inside of the army, other men, and he was having his way with them as well. So I feel that that's the real reason that he got kicked out of the army, but you know, the army protects their own. So instead of doing it dishonorably, they did it honorable. They just wanted him to go. They wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. So they gave him a ticket to anywhere. Where he decided to go was Miami, Florida. Now they leave that out, but you know, shine every way. Of course, I do my homework. At that point, with him being in Florida, Jeffrey basically went there because he didn't want to go home and deal with the shame from his father, grandmother, mom, and, you know, other people of being kicked out of the army. It's just, he felt like he couldn't do anything right, you know, at that moment, which he kind of couldn't because he was an alcoholic. During this time, I feel that there are victims that are being left out. It's not a coincidence that while Jeffrey Dahmer was in Florida, there were certain things that happened to certain people that he acts as if he had nothing to do with. And in my heart's heart, I feel that Jeffrey is completely responsible. Let's get into one of the victims that Jeffrey Dahmer has never admitted to. Did Jeffrey Dahmer, K-I-L-L, the son of America's Most Wanted host, John Walsh? Investigator who interviewed Dahmer in prison convinced that he was responsible for the 1981 life ending of Adam Walsh in the case that shocked America. A retired FBI agent has claimed that Jeffrey Dahmer Unalive, the son of America's Most Wanted host, John Walsh. Investigator Neil Pertel told Radar Online compelling evidence that linked the serial Killer to the 1981 murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh had been bungled by the Florida police. Mr. Pertel interviewed Dahmer in prison after he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 17 boys and men in Wisconsin. Mr. Pertel's quote, he said if he did admit to it, he would be KILLED'd in prison as a P word, Mr. Pertel told Radar Online. My impression was he was admitting he did it. Adam was abducted from a Sears department store in the Hollywood Mall in Florida in 1981. His severed head was found 16 days later in a canal 120 miles away. And the case became one of the most infamous child murders in American history. In 2008, Florida police announced they had concluded that convicted serial KILLER Otis Toole was responsible for the gruesome murder. Toole had confessed to the KILLING before recanting, and he died in prison in 1996. Police failures in search for Adam lost evidence meant that police were unable to secure a conviction against Toole. Investigators found that Dahmer had been living in Miami Beach at the time, and 2 witnesses placed him near the Hollywood Mall on the day of Adam's abduction. Mr. Pertel was one of the first law enforcement officers to arrive at Dahmer's Milwaukee apartment after his arrest, and says he immediately saw parallels to Adam Walsh's passing. Side note, when the officer Pertel says that he saw parallels to Adam Walsh's passing, the 6-year-old boy, meaning that there was decapitated heads inside of the refrigerator. There were 3 decapitated heads inside of Dahmer's refrigerator when he was arrested in 1991. Dahmer publicly denied any involvement in Adam's passing, and authorities eventually ruled him out. In a 1992 interview, Dahmer said, "I told you everything. How I KILLED'd them, how I cooked them, who I ate, Why wouldn't I tell you if I did it to someone else? Mr. Purtell's claims come on the heels of a new Netflix dramatization of Dahmer Saga, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. A journalist who broke the story in 1991 spoke to The Independent earlier this week about what the series got wrong. The passing of Adam Walsh stunned America and led going back into episode 2, paying attention to where Jeffrey talks to his father on the phone while he lives in Florida, and he's crying to his dad and begging him to send for him to come home because it's too hard and too expensive living in Florida. I believe that Jeffrey was so distraught and so emotional because he was about to get caught. He was about to get caught allegedly doing these certain crimes that he had committed, leaving someone that famous child unalive, and the pressure was weighing down on him. So he called his dad to rescue him. He needed to go somewhere that nobody knew him. He needed to disappear. Jeffrey already gives an invisible type of presence, but he literally needed to be invisible. So I feel that that's why he was on the phone with his father so emotional out of fear of getting caught. So it's like, get me out of here type of situation. Quick breakdown. So in 1981, Adam Walsh, the son of John Walsh, who John Walsh is the host of the most popular show, America's Most Wanted, became missing at a Hollywood mall in Florida. And at the time, there was a man by the name of Otis Toole who was responsible for other disappearings of other children, and they were left unalive. With that being said, John Walsh's son, Adam Walsh, was placed into that category. So they just assumed pretty much without really any evidence, besides Otis stating that he did do it and then he recanted before he passed away in prison in 1996. 1981, not only was Jeffrey Dahmer in Florida, he was spotted by 2 witnesses close to that mall the day that Adam Walsh disappeared, when retired FBI agent Mr. Purtell said that he got a confession basically from Jeffrey Dahmer, who stated that he would tell the truth about it, but if he did, he would be labeled as a P word in prison, and that would make him a target to where people would try to end his life. So that's the real reason why he didn't come forward and say what he did to this 6-year-old. Now, don't get me wrong, he had already did it to 2 14-year-olds and allegedly a 16-year-old, but an adolescent is a completely different type of energy. So Dahmer publicly came forward and stated that he had nothing to do with these incidents, but other people would beg to differ. Again, Jeffrey was in the area at the time, and how the young man passed away fits his MO. His head was decapitated and they never found his body. With that being said, Jeffrey is good at getting rid of bodies. And with him being good at getting rid of bodies, Otis really committed the crime. Why didn't he alert the police of where the young boy was, or where Adam's body was? He never told them because he didn't do it. He did confess that he did, but he recanted. Remember, he recanted before he passed away. And I believe that he didn't do it because just like Jeffrey, he stated where his victims were, a lot of their remains, and he told the truth. When they went to go look for the remains of certain people, they found them. So why didn't that happen with Otis? It didn't happen with Otis because I don't believe Otis did it. I believe Jeffrey Dahmer did. In episode 1 and 2, there is a character that is portrayed throughout the series. She's introduced without being introduced, but more so in episode 2, we get a little bit of a better introduction of Glenda Cleveland, who plays the next door neighbor of Jeffrey Dahmer in this miniseries. We've been playing Fact or Fiction, so let's play again. Was Glenda Cleveland Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor? If you answered yes, fact or fiction. If you answered fact, she definitely was. She was Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor, but she lived in the building adjacent. She did not live next door to Jeffrey Dahmer. So that is fictional. She did not live next door to Jeffrey Dahmer. There were neighbors complaining about the smell that was coming out of his apartment, but Glinda was not that neighbor. In the docuseries, they show that Glinda is his next door neighbor, which she is not. There was a neighbor that stayed across from his apartment, not next door, but across from his apartment, when the neighbor next door did complain about the smell that was coming out of his apartment to the landlord and the supervisor of the building. When that was going on and they did come and approach him about it and said that he needed to clean it, he did have a neighbor that lived across from him come and clean his apartment. So he didn't hire a cleaning crew, how they show in the miniseries when he goes over and has the conversation with Glinda. That never happened because the neighbor that stayed right across from him cleaned his apartment. Glinda did draw a special connection to one of the victims, and that victim was Conorick. She really had a connection with him because she basically saved him without saving him. It's the unfortunate part. So to explain that, Glinda saw victim Conorick, which was 14 years old, staggering down the alley. Remember, she was not the next door neighbor. So he was staggering down the alley, mumbling, bleeding, and whatnot. So she saw him, and her daughter went down and, grabbed him and brought him to the porch and called the police. They wrapped a blanket around him and called the police because, he's a child. And her daughter actually recognized Conorick from the neighborhood, from playing like hopscotch, and stuff like that. So she knew that he was young, and Glinda could see basically in his face that this is a young boy, he's a younger guy. So they went in protective mode and grabbed him and called the police. So he was muttering words and, his words weren't really audible. And upon that happening, with the police approaching, Jeffrey was returning from an outing of errands that he went to go do while the young boy was hurt. Because at that point in time, Jeffrey had drilled a hole into the young man's skull and poured a certain acid inside of the skull. So with that being said, his brain was like frying, right there in front of them. But they didn't know, Glinda and her daughter, they didn't know what was going on. They had no idea. So when the police came, Glinda stated to the police that this was a younger boy that they had seen. He's hurt. Y'all need to take him, basically, like he needs to go to the hospital, type of situation. And Jeffrey approaches and calm, cool, and collected lets the police know that, hey, this is my boyfriend. We're hanging out. We had an argument and whatnot. And now he's, just leaving the apartment because he's upset, but he lives here. We're dating. So the police asked him his age, and Jeffrey told the police that Conorick was 19 years old and he was indeed 14. So trusting Jeffrey Dahmer, once again, with white privilege, they just assumed this white collar, handsome, it's nice looking, kind of awkward, but upstanding citizen looking man, was definitely not up to any good. Of course, he's telling the truth, but let's verify a couple things to make sure. So in the miniseries, it states that the police officers requested an ID from the young man. They did not. They never asked for an ID in the non-fictional story. They just asked where he lived. And Jeffrey told them that he lived there, at his apartment with him. So the police entered the apartment to see some sort of proof as if the young man, Conorick, which was 14, but Dahmer was lying and saying that he was 19, if he lived there. So Jeffrey showed them some alleged photographs and whatnot and said, like, look, he definitely lives here. Here's his clothes, whatnot. And the police completely dismissed the situation, decided that Jeffrey was telling the truth, and left, with the police not realizing that this boy was not only 14 years old, and them not wanting to be involved because it had everything to do with homosexuality, and they were against that. And again, he's South Asian or American Indian, whatever people are classifying him. So to them, he's not really a worry, although you can clearly tell that this boy is very young. So to them, he's not a problem. Another thing about the situation with Conorick and Jeffrey Dahmer. At the time, Jeffrey Dahmer was on probation for lewd acts with a child, with a minor. That child, that minor that he got charged with the charge for, was Conorick's brother. So Conorick had already known that Jeffrey Dahmer had did certain things to his brother. And with that being said, Conorick was at court and saw Jeffrey face to face when everything had transpired, when his family took Jeffrey to court to get Jeffrey put on charges for what he did to Conorick's brother. When the police came after Glinda called the police and said that there was a young child, if the police would have ran Jeffrey's name, they would have found out that this probably is a young child because he's already been charged for something due to the context of what's going on right now, what he's being accused of. They decided not to do that. So again, white privilege is something else, because if Jeffrey Dahmer was any other race, I feel that more action would have been taken. That's how you know the police never ran Jeffrey's name, asked him for ID or anything like that, because they would have found those things out. Hey, he's currently on probation for being with a kid underage. So maybe this kid is underage. This is where Glinda comes back in. Glinda, after the police left and all of that stuff and left the young boy with Jeffrey, she called the police department again to get a follow-up and see if they found out how old he was and all of that, because she knew he was a kid. And the police told her that it was taken care of and that he was not a child. So yeah, and the whole time he was. And not only that, Jeffrey Dahmer had took Conorick's life not too soon after the police left. Here is a small interview from Glenda Cleveland after the aftermath, when Conorick had already passed away, when everything was already too late, when they finally caught Jeffrey. They came and interviewed Glinda, the real Glenda Cleveland.
Cleveland relives the frustration of being shut out by a police operator as she insisted the person being beaten was a child.
When I say what I have to say and I know it to be true, I don't feel that I have to constantly keep repeating myself. And I think that can be said for everyone.
Glenda Cleveland remembers the day Conorick died, remembers the police assurances that everything was okay. Did you start to doubt yourself?
I must admit I did. I did.
But do you feel they let that boy down that night?
Yes, they did. Yes. Yes, he was definitely let down. He was let down as low as he could get. And that was to his grave. He can't get much lower than...
We are definitely going to continue Sean-tober and break down the rest of the Dahmer series that just came out on Netflix, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. But I do have a problem. We're definitely going to continue Sean-tober and break down the rest of the Dahmer series that just came out on Netflix, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. But I do have a problem, just like the rest of America, with a lot of things that Netflix, not just Ryan Murphy, Netflix has done to the victims. And you might say, well, Sean, why is this a surviving Netflix? What did Netflix do? Well, Netflix and Ryan Murphy dropped the ball by not reaching out to the victims' families and the victims that survived. Not everybody passed away due to the hands of Jeffrey Dahmer. And with Netflix and Ryan Murphy coming forward and doing a docuseries or whatever they want to call it, a crime series on the Jeffrey Dahmer story and not alerting the victims and victims' families is a big problem. It's a problem because these people are being re-traumatized by everything that happened. So if your family member was a victim, that means you are going to watch this docuseries and see in detail what happened to them. That can definitely be re-traumatizing. Why would you want to see your cousin or brother or son in those type of predicaments? It is a very scary thing to watch, and it is a very sad thing to watch. On top of that, traumatizing. These families hear what happened, but they don't really know in detail in what happened to their family members. So to see their family members distraught, sad, afraid, petrified of this maniac that is going to do certain things to them makes you relive it. So how fair is that you turn on Netflix or you see on blogs and whatnot that they're going into detail in what happened to your family, a traumatic situation that happened to your family. You get to turn on TV and watch how your family passed away. very sad. Netflix and Ryan Murphy would have reached out to the family members and let them know exactly what was going on. It would have gave them a chance to brace for what's coming. They could have prepared mentally, physically, all of those things for what's to come. And they did none of that, especially with Conorick and a lot of the other victims, especially the black victims. A lot of their families, not only were they not alerted, but they did not know what happened. Also, they tried to make it more so of that this docuseries or crime series was going to tell the story of the victims so that people wouldn't feel sorry for Jeffrey Dahmer. It's sad to say because even in the Netflix Inside interview with Evan Peters, he stated that Ryan Murphy told him that this is not going to be told from Jeffrey Dahmer's point of view. It's going to be told from the victim's point of view. Well, Ryan, how can you do that without the victims' families? And there are still victims that are still alive this day that didn't pass away again due to the hands of Jeffrey Dahmer. No different than Stacey Edwards and others. They definitely could have given the characters or the actors that are going to be portraying their life story, they could have gave them more so of inside detail on how they felt, why they felt that way, and whatnot. And again, they're making the story, it's fictional and how the docuseries is telling it. So it's like Ryan or Netflix didn't even care about how the victims would feel about their real stories not being told. With Evan Peters and Ryan Murphy, again, stating that it wasn't going to be told from Jeffrey Dahmer's side because they didn't want people to feel sympathy or empathy for him. You dropped the ball completely, especially with episode 2, when you go from Jeffrey's backstory until now or until he was in adulthood. It was hard for people not to feel sorry for him. I mean, look at the screen. Do you see what people are commenting? There's a lot of victims that Ryan Murphy or Netflix did not bring up, especially into detail. So if this is supposed to be about the victims, I feel like Ryan Murphy and Netflix should have made sure that Ryan Murphy contacted the families and got as much information as he could. And then on top of that, the victims that were little to no information on, go digging and see how much information you can find so you can incorporate their stories too. So did Ryan Murphy and Netflix push, more so of the energy to be backing the victims? To a certain degree, because we got to see certain backstories of certain victims, but a lot of their stories were completely left out. They didn't leave anything out when it came to Jeffrey Dahmer. They made sure that we saw his backstory about what happened between him and his family, him being abandoned by his mother and father, and so on and so forth. So you definitely pushed a narrative for people to feel sorry for Jeffrey. It was already going to be hard for most of America, especially white people that are big fans of Evan Peters, especially women and men, gay men especially, that find him attractive, for them not to fantasize the role of Jeffrey Dahmer just because you have somebody attractive playing the role of someone that was somewhat attractive. So the dreamy aspect of him to where people kind of are attracted to him, which people feel sorry for people just because they're attracted to him. Like, oh, he's going through this, that's sad because he's so attractive. Or she's going through that, that's sad because she's so attractive. You want to keep him as a villain, as evil, because that's what he was, pure evil. There was many times throughout this docuseries too where they humanized Jeffrey Dahmer to make him more likable. That's the complete opposite of what they were supposed to be doing. They were supposed to make the victims more human, meaning people need to feel sorry for the victims. People need to have sympathy and empathy for the victims instead of Jeffrey, which was pushed back in the 80s and the 90s. More people had sympathy for Jeffrey than they had for the victims. And a lot of the victims weren't even spoke of. They only talked about the ones that had more traction, like Conorick and Stacey Edwards and Antonio. They talked about those people because they had more information instead of trying to find the information on the other victims, but they didn't care. They made sure that the other victims were lost in translation, which was what Ryan Murphy and Netflix were supposed to be doing the opposite. It was supposed to be to get to know the victims. So story being told was more so from the victim's perspective, and it was still told from Jeffrey's, which is mad disrespectful disrespectful to the families of the victims and to the survivors. Because again, you are making this guy look like a hero. You're making him look as if he was something good for America, and he wasn't. It's bad enough that y'all keep making documentaries and movies about these serial KILLERs as if this is something we need to know. Like, we don't. It happened. It was unfortunate. Let it go, instead of humanizing or making it a fantasy to put as much energy, money behind something that was pure evil. These families keep having to relive it. If they're going to relive a trauma that they've went through due to something that happened to somebody that they loved dearly, it should be done from their perspective, meaning that they have input on how you're going to talk about their loved one, instead of you just slapping them on a screen, slapping a character and an actor behind them, making a fictional story about what happened, and it's just supposed to be okay. It's not. It is not okay. It is very disrespectful. Look at it from their perspective. If this was one of your family members, would you want Netflix to just go forward with it? Or would you want Netflix and Ryan Murphy and the other producers of this to reach out to you and get your input to see how you feel, or if you even think that this should be happening at all? They don't consider these people, and it's not fair. They keep trying to make it seem like we have evolved and that we have taken steps forward as a society, and we have not. Just like back then, how they didn't care about minorities and blacks because that's who the victims were. It's the same thing to this day. I feel that because Ryan Murphy and Netflix did reach out to the people that are left of the Dahmer family. They did reach out to certain people, but let's not reach out to any of the black families or any of the American Indian or the Latino let's not reach out to any of them. Let's just reach out to the white people. Ryan, you're defeating the purpose. Netflix, you're defeating the purpose. This is still your brand, Netflix. If somebody's going to sue, they're going to sue Netflix. Ryan Murphy might be a part of the lawsuit, but the main lawsuit is going to be after Netflix because you keep misappropriating these black and gay stories. Tell the truth. Be respectful and reach out to the families of these people and the people themselves if it's something that you're going to do. I do not blame any of the actors, but I do blame Netflix and I do blame Ryan Murphy. I don't feel, again, that it is fair that they keep traumatizing people and re-traumatizing people, and they could care less. Ryan Murphy has been doing this for a very long time with things like the American Horror Story and other projects that he has done. Very offensive things, very traumatic things, but again, they don't care. Ryan and Netflix dropped the ball. They should have contacted the families. It's a simple phone call, email, or text message to get some feedback. Instead, they just run with these projects because it's filled with stories of minorities and gay people. And they're okay exaggerating and exploiting the stories to get a dime off of it instead of authentically telling how these things went down, especially if they are traumatic. They made this entire docuseries about Jeffrey Dahmer. This is not about the victims. The victims are incorporated, but it is not about them. The main character is Jeffrey Dahmer. There's only a few episodes to where they don't include him more so and just add the victims. And again, nobody has been contacted about their stories, which again makes it a very bad look for Netflix and Ryan Murphy. I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Part 2 is dropping tomorrow. Seantober will continue. Make sure you like and subscribe. And until the next video, I love you all. Don't worry, there will be many parts to this. We have 10 episodes to cover, and we only covered the first 2. So make sure you come back. There's a lot of detail about what happened to these minority people back early in the 80s and 90s, and we are gonna get down and dirty with the truth. Until the next time, bye. Fresh.